Good evening. Happy Wellness Wednesday. I am Laurel Brennan, and we are here inside the Facebook group Brain Wellness and Dementia Prevention. And I am here with Paul Welliver. You can call him Doc. Hi, Paul. Welcome.
Hi, thank you. And Doc's a nickname. And when I do my lives, I go, Doc Welliver here, but I'm not a doctor.
So let me give you a little background on Paul Welliver. We were just chatting about his dad, who was my doctor when I was a little girl. And you know, you have an amazing last name. Like, you have to work in wellness with the last name Welliver. And coincidentally, you do. So then I guess when I was in high school, Paul was my athletic trainer. This is like small town stuff. But then my older brother, who is now a physical therapist, but started out as an athletic trainer, worked under Paul. So we have a lot of history. So I'm grateful to have Paul here tonight. And I'm going to start off by reading his bio, and then we will jump into questions. So Paul Welliver is a Maryland State licensed athletic trainer and a Maryland licensed massage therapist. As an athletic trainer, he has worked for the Atlanta Braves and the Washington Bullets, now Wizards, of the NBA. Paul was the massage therapist for the Baltimore Stallions of the CFL and the Baltimore Bandits of the AHL. He has worked at NCAA Division I at Indiana State University, NCAA Division II at Newberry College, South Carolina, and NCAA Division III at McDaniel College. Paul has 2 Masters of Science degrees in physical education with athletic training specializations from Indiana State, a university, and counseling psychology from McDaniel College. He worked in Maryland State Public Schools as an athletic trainer from 1990 until October of 2016. He was elected to the Maryland Athletic Trainers Association Hall of Fame in 2009. And Paul has been in private practice as a massage therapist since 1993. Welcome, Paul Welliver.
Thank you.
So we are here tonight because this is Brain Injury Awareness Month. And you have a pretty deep history in protecting people's heads and the brains inside of their skull. And I wanted to kind of pick your brain, for lack of a better phrase, about your experience, and see if we can dig into what happens when there's a brain injury, what the short-term effects are, what the long-term effects are, how we can reduce risk. And so the first question, really, share with the audience a little bit more about you. So what was your journey to becoming an athletic trainer and massage therapist? How did it become your passion? Did you know as a child this is what you wanted to do? How did it evolve?
As a child, I didn't see my father much because he had a private practice. He taught at the University of Maryland Medical School. He was the team, not only the team physician for Western Maryland College, now McDaniel, but he was the infirmary doctor. So every day he had his practice all day till 4. Then he would race to the college and see students that were sick and away from home. And that was from 4 till 5 something. He had to skip dinner and go back to his office till 9 at night. So if I saw him as a little kid, I was on the sidelines of Westminster High. He was a team doctor. And then, or Saturday afternoon at Western Maryland College. And at Western Maryland College, they had this older gentleman named Fern Hitchcock, who was the athletic trainer. And I noticed that my dad relied on him and he relied on my dad. And Fern knew this cool stuff about his athletes, and he knew the medical stuff. Fern was way ahead of his time. So Fern has an interesting job, but who heard of athletic training in the 60s and early 70s? So I go to college, and Fern calls the Gettysburg College trainer and said, this guy can help you. because I took a workshop from Fern in the summer of 9th grade, learned how to tape ankles and stuff. And so I taped ankles when I was in high school for varsity football before I made varsity football. So it was kind of a hobby. Then I go to Gettysburg College and I help the two athletic trainers. Gettysburg College was ahead of their time. They had not just one athletic trainer, like most of the United States had one or zero. Gettysburg always had two. So I had a work study job.
Yeah.
I was an athletic trainer, but I was a history major. Keep in mind, there's no future in history. That's a little history. So, but all of a sudden I got interested in it, but I didn't see it as a real profession because it wasn't really hatched yet. Western Maryland still had one trainer by the time I got that job in '84. And I worked by myself at Western Maryland College, now McDaniel, for 4 years as the only trainer for 27 sports, and I taught. So we've come a long way, baby. But, I thought that athletic training was cool, but I didn't realize till later it was a profession. And I went to Indiana State to get a master's degree in it. Most people said, are you a boxing trainer, a horse trainer? People didn't know what it was I was leaving for. I would say there's this guy for the Baltimore Colts named Eddie Block, who's an athletic trainer. He wore this white suit. And then Ralph Salbon was the Orioles athletic trainer, and he had this big white suit, And so I'm the guy that runs on the field with scissors in their pocket when somebody gets hurt. And people started to understand that when I left in '80. So in '82, my first job was at Newberry, South Carolina, and they never had an athletic trainer before. And I was hired as the men's housing director, and I was the trainer for free. We had 600 total kids at the school at the time. Now it's bigger, but we had 600 students. We were co-ed, so half were women. So 100 students were on the football team out of 600 total kids. I had my hands full, plus I had men's housing with room changes and people smoking dope and people getting locked out. I was a heck of a job for a year and a half. And then I went to the minor leagues with the Braves as a trainer, where I drove the team bus. I've been through it. So anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's always been interesting. And the trainer always kind of knows what's wrong. If you ever watch Bull Durham with Kevin Costner about minor league baseball, that was filmed in my organization, because if you look at the uniforms, those are old Braves pants, because the Durham Bulls used to be single-A Braves. So the trainer knows what's wrong with Nuke LaLoosh, the pitcher at the time. His chakras are blocked. He can't breathe out of his right eyelid. But so the athletic trainer always kind of knows what's wrong. And so I got into it with my first master's from '80 to '82. And athletic training only had 7 master's degree programs in the United States. Now there's a whole mess more.
Yeah.
But I got into one of the 7 programs, fortunately, on double secret probation, because I came out of Gettysburg as a history major. I didn't have a lot of the prerequisites, but they let me in.
Yeah.
I'm glad.
You were a doctor's son, so that was enough. But
no. I promised to do the right thing. And I had to take skills classes in physical education. So I took advanced scuba diving and racquetball. And then I took ballet to meet women. And that was a skills class. So
you mentioned football. So you were an athlete, and you grew up seeing your dad helping athletes, but also working all the time. So you thought, maybe I don't want to be a doctor and not have that quality of life of being at home on occasion, or did that
that's
play a role?
Exactly right. That's why my sister went to nursing and I went to athletic training. You still help people, but if you're any good as a doctor, you don't have much of a life.
Right.
So I wasn't going to be that kind of doctor, and my sister wasn't going to be that kind of doctor. She could have done that.
Yeah.
My sister had better grades by far in college, so it's not saying much. But anyway, we both chose not to be doctors. There's no doctors out of the 4 children. But you deal with healthy people. Now, doctors deal with really sick people, but athletic trainers generally don't. That's why I've had to brush up with all sorts of things since. And orthopedics never see sick people. If I'm going to have my knee scoped and I have a cold, the surgery's canceled. Yeah. So they make fun of orthopedic surgeons because they're not real doctors. They don't see sick people. And in the old days of orthopedics in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, there were the stupidest, always a guy. They're the stupidest guy in the medical school class, but he liked to deal with hammers and saws and nails and screws and plates. And all they did was put fractures back together. And in the 70s, this thing called sports medicine exploded. Now it's one of your top professions to get in, or specialties as a doctor. Your smartest people, and not just guys, are orthopedic surgeons.
Right.
So now they make fun of pediatricians. Anyway,
so I can relate a little bit on that beginning story that you shared, that nobody knew what athletic training was, because I'm an occupational therapist, and I fall under that same umbrella of confusion. People are like, oh, is that physical therapy? So next month is occupational therapy month, so I'll talk all about it in April. But I'm glad that your profession is now better known. I loved my athletic trainer, you in high school, and the athletic trainer in college. They were, my buddies, because I needed their assistance on multiple occasions. So you ready to jump into brain questions?
Yeah, I'm ready.
You're ready?
Oh, I want to say a quick massage therapy story.
Oh, sure.
So, because I didn't understand all that. So I get my first master's, and I've been to the pros, and I'm like this genius guy. But then I get the Western Maryland job, now called McDaniel, and they didn't pay me very much. And I started to get a little bit upset. So what can I get out of this bunch besides a salary? I'll start a second master's for free. And that was in counseling psychology, because in athletic training, you saw athletes get their gift taken away through injury. Then you saw subsequent depression, anxiety. I started to realize I wanted to be more prepared to deal with the mental part of that. And then female athletes with some eating disorders, and male athletes, especially the wrestlers, and then the gymnasts would do the bulimia. And so then you see kids at school that deal with death of parents. And so I got a second master's for free. So now in 1990, I'm set. I got a free master's degree, and so I'm ready to go out and do something nobody's done before, and that's to start an athletic training program in the Carroll County high schools. We started that in 1990, and we put a student athletic trainer, an athletic trainer in every one of the 5 at the time Carroll County high schools. And no other county really had that except the county around Salisbury, because they would put their students out there. But Carroll County was the second county in Maryland to put athletic trainers in all the high schools. We're way ahead of ourselves. So I'm this genius that starts this thing, and I chose Westminster for the first 3 years. And so I'm this genius. And then all of a sudden, I decide to get a massage in 1993. and that woman made you feel things you hadn't felt before, as far as pain or relaxation, or I was in outer space after one massage. And I drove to Baltimore the next day, where the massage school was, after I watched my friend Herman Costley get his ACL reconstructed at Kernan Hospital. I watched his surgery all morning, drove to Baltimore School of Massage in Fells Point in the afternoon, and enrolled for the next year, and became a massage therapist, because that was the third part of the deal. 1 master's, 2 masters, massage therapy.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, they all support each other very well. Yeah, awesome.
Okay, let's roll. Sorry.
Okay. So as an athletic trainer in all levels of sports, so you did youth and college and professionals, what was your role in assessing head injuries, concussions and then preventing injury as well?
It really changed over time. But for a long time, the athletic trainer would appear on the scene, whether it's practice or the game, and the referees would look at you sideways until you explain, look, this is my responsibility. I mean, something can happen and you can go home, but these kids are my responsibility, so I have to make sure they're okay. And I watched concussion treatments and evaluations get more serious over the years. I might have somebody get their bell rung, and that's a very transient ischemia of the brain. It's just quick. You're just dazed. You took a punch, but you can come back for the second round, you know? Mm-hmm. So I watch kids get maybe a quick thing. They got up slow in the game, and then I'd pull them off the field for a whole series or the rest of the quarter or the second half, but they still might go back in the game in the early 90s. Over time, that changed, and not because of liability, because the science changed.
Right.
And I'm not talking about the science that you're seeing with this COVID stuff, because they've ignored a lot of the science along the way in favor of other things, but we started to take concussions more seriously. There's no such thing as having your bell rung. And so my role over the years was really to protect the kid. And I met my share of parents over the years, and that's gotten a lot worse. Put them back in, you know, and they use the S word like scholarship. And I'd always say your kid has a better chance of being hit by a bus than getting an athletic scholarship. We know there's $150 of academic money for college to every $1 of athletic scholarship. Your athletic scholarship is really rare. But over time, I saw some high school kids that it's special. It's almost like the United States Supreme Court was asked to rule on pornography. And they said, we can't define it, but we know it when we see it. That's how I saw athletes. When I saw athletes blossom, and I saw them, they could do some things that other people couldn't do. Whether it was earlier for women, you saw ninth grade women pull stunts because they were physically mature faster. And women will argue that men never mature. But anyway, well, I could see a 9th or 10th grade girl in high school and say, she's the real deal. You know, but sometimes a 9th grade boy, you had no idea how good they were going to be. And another thing about 9th grade boys, the stars coming out of the little leagues, or I was a star at Gamber Smallwood in football because they shaved twice a day in the 9th grade. They weren't very good as seniors. They were kind of done. And the rest of the people, the boys caught up and became men. And you might see that early 9th grade boy star get discouraged and that the senior would blossom. So that was the difference in maturity. You had to, and I always kept that in mind with concussions. You know, that 9th and 10th and 11th grader stayed out longer by far than that senior who it was the last time they were going to play. 5% of kids in high school athletes play in college. That's 1 out of 20. So when you recognize that, you and I were one of the 5%. We played in college, and the person that plays for money in college, then your percentages really drop. So I never jeopardized health, whatever kind of injury it was, including head injuries for the college experience, except for the academic part, you know.
Right. Right. So you were saying there's no such thing as having your bell rung, meaning we know that there's not just a short term, you know, oh, this is a problem for 10 seconds and it's not going to be a problem, you know, in 10 days. So right. So can you, well, let me jump to the next question because you touched on it already, which was, did you ever come up against opinions other than your own that put, you know, quote unquote, the game or scholarships that you mentioned over the kids' personal safety in regard to concussions?
Yeah, I had several of those.
Yeah.
And I'll go back to the foundations of concussions because it's important. I was taught in graduate school with a chart, and the chart explained, here's first degree concussion, here's second degree concussion, here's third degree concussion. And then on the other side of the chart going down was the symptom. And so keep in mind, I memorized that chart and it really never became outdated. The problem with the chart is, and I can't explain it except to tell you that concussion is a clinical syndrome characterized by transient loss of normal neural function following external head trauma. The definition of syndrome is a group of symptoms when fully placed together cannot be fully explained. So when you're dealing with a syndrome, AIDS is acquired immune deficiency syndrome. You know, concussion is a clinical syndrome. When you start talking about concussion, you are in a jackpot, because when you talk about first degree, when you talk about loss of consciousness, no loss of consciousness, first degree. Consciousness lost up to 60 seconds or a minute, second degree. Loss of consciousness lasting more than a minute, third degree. Same with nausea. Same with tinnitus, which is ringing in the ears. Same with return to play. You know, if this happens, if this happens. So when you see a concussion that was a bell rung, it was a first degree. But all of a sudden they had retrograde amnesia lasting until the next day, and they don't remember the day before forever. That's third degree. So in the chart never really made sense to try to hold somebody out. You had to look at the total athlete. You had to know the athlete. And when you talk about peculiar behavior, most linebackers in football and all lacrosse players are weirdos. So you can't identify peculiar behavior unless you know your athlete. Yeah. That's why the doctor seeing the kid the next day that the mom took in with a little bit of a headache, they don't know how weird they were acting. They weren't there to be scared. One of the cases that I was able to overcome before the one that got me, we'll talk about in a second, I had many gifted athletes, but this girl was going to get money to play lacrosse at Pennsylvania State University, Division I. We know she's getting money. She's committed. She's signed. We go to her senior year, and this is for lacrosse. We go to senior year, and she's so good in all sports. She's a star in soccer, and she plays the field in the first half, and she plays goal in the second half. And one foggy Monday night at North Carroll, she goes out to make a save, and she has this collision, and she goes into full seizures. Ooh. On the field. You know, seizures, violent seizures. And I heard about it from the coach. He said, I was scared to death. Keep in mind, it's foggy. They can't fly her to shock trauma. So they ambulance ride her from Hampstead to shock trauma in Baltimore City. She is treated and released. They called it a neck sprain, so she wouldn't get in the concussion protocol and be able to play sooner. That's the crap I had to put up with. So anyway, this coach the next day is scared to death. He doesn't know if she's going to be okay because he saw her violently shake more than a minute. I mean, eyes in the back of the head. And on my little chart, that's a third degree concussion, right? Because she's lost consciousness for over a minute. And seizures means there's brain injury. Yeah. So all I can think about, plus I love this girl. I said to her after 10th grade, you have no idea how good you are. I do, because something had happened and she was discouraged about something. So anyway, now we're a year and a half later, and she's a fall senior year, and I know she's getting money the next year to play lacrosse unless we mess up. Mom starts on me and starts on the coach. She didn't have a concussion. The shock trauma, the expert said she had a neck sprain. I want you to give her the test. I said, I'll give her the test February 1st to try to get her ready for spring lacrosse, because I heard what happened and I don't give a damn what shock trauma said. I don't care. The only reason I won that battle is lacrosse coach says to mom, do you understand what he's doing for your daughter? He's saving her brain. So I won that one, and I won one, the time before. And what happened towards the end of my career was they bought this test from a hospital. It was called an impact test. And some of the universities were doing it. Some of the pros were doing it. And this was a computer test created by neuropsychologists. Now, they're not medical doctors. They are PhDs in neuropsychology. And they made their money for years off of, you guessed it, the epidemic of ADD and ADHD. They would test your child for 4 or 5 hours with a battery of tests, like with blocks and attention, and they made all their money off those tests. They created the impact test, and a hospital or a clinic would buy these tests like a McDonald's franchise and then sell them to school systems or colleges or pros. So that you would get these tests and get the password, and you used every other computer in the media center, and you tested all your kids all summer, and you had their baseline scores, and these things took a half hour, and it took computer time, and sometimes at the end of the half hour, the computers would freeze and crash, and you had to do them all over again. But anyway, you get a baseline score on all these little cherubs in the high school, and then if you had a concussion, you would retake this test. Now, first of all, I'm getting word that we have this test that doesn't work. Kind of like the COVID testing. It's tough to test for things that are a syndrome. So anyway, right off the bat, I was having kids with 3 concussions in their history doing better on the test, the retest, than they did on their baseline. I mean, so it was a nightmare.
So an issue with reliability.
Reliability, and so it caused a lot of kids to go back. A lot of trainers were once the athletic trainers were then given final responsibility and not doctor's clearance, these doctors signed the paper, go take the test, it's the trainer's fault. So all of a sudden the trainers were back in the corners.
Can I jump in? Because this started way after I was out of school, but I remember hearing parents talking about their kids intentionally doing poorly on the initial test because
so they have a low baseline.
Yeah, so they had a low baseline.
And so the neuropsych people said, we know that's going on. So sometimes we'll flunk the baseline because they didn't try. But that was rare. Then you had to retest them. And then sometimes the young athletic trainers were intimidated. They'd give the test too fast. That would cause concussion-like symptoms. Flashing lights, they'd get headaches from the test. So it was a fist fight when they bought these tests in like 2011. And I was out the door by 2013, 18 months later, because the fever pitch picked up. And every time there was a retest, you had to email the whole thing to the neuropsych guy who never saw the athlete in their lives, and they'd render an opinion. Well, this score indicates there might be a blah, blah, blah. You can try and send them back. So it was a very expensive, baloney, expensive, time-consuming extra step that I never needed.
Right.
And so it cost me my job. And we'll come to the one, here's the headline. This is March 1st, 2013. Trainer ousted from position for the school system. The Carroll County school system wasn't even quoted. They ran for the hills. And who knows what's going on behind the scenes, but Carroll County was going to take the athletic trainer's contract away from the clinic where I worked. And there was all sorts of backroom deals. And so I basically got paid a full salary for 3.5 years, but I never knew the day I was going to get let go. And I finally got let go in October of 2016. And then that kid was was retested quickly. I'm trying to hold out a kid of 3 concussions in 7 months. And the third one was a wrestling tournament. Kid couldn't come to school for 2 weeks. Oh, let's get him back into wrestling and then lacrosse. And for the rest of his life, he turned out poorly. He had 1 week of community college and he never could do college. But anyway, they dropped the whole thing in 2018 because it was expensive. It didn't work. You can't even give it voluntarily now. It didn't work. It was a moneymaker. So I saw it all along. They thought the test was going to help clear things up. All it did was expensive and it muddied the water. And that's why it's gone.
Right.
So.
Right. So you saw these kids, you knew their personalities before and after. You were directly on the field and saw, you weren't there for the seizure, but you heard specifically about the seizure. And
yep.
So you're making assessments based on the child in front of you, not, somebody who's thousands of miles away looking at a
test.
A test, yeah.
And I make an assessment based on their future.
Right.
I'll tell you what stinks. It's come to light in the last couple years that the National Football League rated concussions with Black players lower than white players because they assessed that Black players weren't as smart anyway. That's come to light. I mean, this has all come to light.
Wow.
The National NFL stands for not for long. I don't watch it anymore. I think it's just awful. It was one of the greatest games ever. If you look at the game of football, it's our last team sport. And if you look at the danger of concussion, I saw a lot more concussions in soccer. There was no helmets. Yeah. I saw the serious stuff in wrestling. All of a sudden, I saw the head hit the mat in wrestling and cause it. You don't have to hit heads.
Right.
I saw a lot of football helmets hit the ground in the summer when the ground was hard. All it takes is external head trauma.
Right. I mean, your brain is floating inside of your brain case. It's the smack of the brain inside the skull that causes the problem, which is not necessarily changing at all just because there's a helmet on the outside.
Yeah, it's a nice a mitigator, and the helmets have really increased. If you want to play with a great helmet, play football with a motorcycle helmet. Man, those things are really great. And the lacrosse helmet when I played was a tinker toy. I mean, that was just a piece of plastic. It had that little tie in the back, and now it looks like they're from outer space. I mean, so the helmets have evolved. Yeah. It's interesting they put helmets on women's lacrosse players in Massachusetts, and the sticks came up and the head injuries increased. So that the women's game is such a beautiful game because it takes more skill because you don't have the deep pocket, as you know. So it's been interesting. If you want to test for concussion, the police do it all the time, unfortunately, when they test for drunk driving, because they're both impairments. One's caused by alcohol or drugs, or alcohol is a drug, or other drugs. But when they test your eyes with a pen light, they do the same thing I would do. And what happens when you're drinking or you have a concussion, your eyes can't go from right to left. It gets locked into an involuntary nystagmus. You should see an nystagmus. That eyeball starts shaking, man. You go, oh, man. Well, that's why the police, and they just don't go from right to left. They come up and they go right in the center. And if you have a head injury or you're drinking, you get locked in a nystagmus. That's what they're doing. And they come here, they come down, and you really want to do pupil tracking. You don't have a light. You use 4 fingers instead of 1. That'll cause a replication of symptoms of the nystagmus. Your eyes. Have you ever seen it? It's really something. You go, uh-oh. Yeah. And it's involuntary. You can't fake it.
Yeah,
right. It helps disqualify you. So
right. Now I'm going to go off script for a second because I have multiple, unfortunately, personal stories about with head injuries from whatever you would classify as a stage 1 or type 1, all the way to, persistent vegetative state. So, and I want to share about my nephew first. And I shared this story with you earlier today. So he was a high school football player in Ohio, and they didn't have regulation about how many minutes or how many games you could play. And so he was playing both JV and varsity, offense, defense, and special teams. Was a good player, so they used him a lot. And he didn't have any specific, hard hit where he was knocked unconscious. But after one game, he was feeling a little So his dad took him to McDonald's to get a Coke and see if he could settle his stomach, and he ate and threw up. Next day, he had a terrible headache, and symptoms just kind of got worse and worse, where he was struggling in school. Go ahead.
That's significant. That's the person, I might see somebody get dinged and throw up. And I learned that that's no big deal, except they can't play. But a lot of those people are very anxious and they clear up. But your guy he got worse and worse and worse.
Yes. And it was an extensive recovery time, more than a year. And so I want to talk about that in light of football that you mentioned already. And when I was just back in the United States, we moved here from Scotland. And it was the first time I was working in occupational therapy in the physical rehab area. And one of my coworkers had John Mackey as a patient. So this was, for those people that don't know, he was a Baltimore Colt. And he was one of the early people to really be vocal. And his wife, Sylvia, was extremely vocal about all these NFL players who, 30 years later are debilitated for a variety of reasons. They hadn't come up with the term, the chronic traumatic encephalopathy just yet.
Right.
But it emerged after he was really on the forefront and pushing. So can you talk about CTE and football and the problem with football, and then we'll go from there.
So when I think about the brain, I think about the hard drive on your computer. And once that's damaged or scratched, things don't work right anymore. And we used to think in sports medicine, the big knockout punch. Man, they got hit and both guys didn't move. And then if you didn't have a neck fracture, you came back and we'll see how you do. Maybe not the rest of that game, although sometimes you were knocked out, you still played in that game. But we always thought the knockout punch caused the brain injuries forever. And then in 1984, in 1984, the term was coined second impact syndrome. And second impact syndrome was more of a clinical syndrome where you had a concussive episode that was documented. And maybe it wasn't a big one, but it was a concussion. And then the second one followed in the next days or the next weeks. And all of a sudden that mild hit, they were full-blown sick again and often dead. So then we knew something was up as of 84 with second impact syndrome. And there's that syndrome word again. I mean, how can somebody get knocked out and they were horrible, but they came back 2 weeks later and never had a problem. But somebody had a little ding and they came back 5 days later and they were debilitated for life. We have a famous women's Division I lacrosse story that came out of a Westminster family, and the girl was from Annapolis, and she was a star. She was one of the finest Division I lacrosse players in the United States. And in the playoffs at Maryland, maybe sophomore year, she's already a superstar. She has a documented concussion in the playoffs, and then plays 5 days later in a playoff game and gets a seemingly minor thing. She never played again. And so you go from tops in your sport to you never played again. And she had to drop out of Maryland, and then she would gradually go back to Maryland and hang out with her team, but she couldn't play because she had motor function things. And to this day, she's still fighting her way back. That's been 10 years. So yeah, long term. So you had concussions the first time, then you had second impact syndrome. But in the last 15 years with Mackey started to be on the radar as of 2001, I think. You know, he was really at the forefront, and he would die 10 years later of being very sick. And what you saw with Mackey was like Muhammad Ali or Jim McMahon, the very articulate, witty, vocal athletes. I mean, if you look at old Cassius Clay films of Muhammad Ali, you couldn't speak any clearer than this guy. But through repeated head trauma, he got very sick. And I don't care if he's diagnosed with this or that or dementia or Alzheimer's. These people get very sick. One of the worst dementias to get over time is Lewy body dementia. And that was named after Dr. Lewy, L-E-W-Y. And one of the most famous Lewy, I never heard of it until Robin Williams killed himself. Now, Robin Williams was diagnosed with Lewy body dementia, but nobody knew about it. He kept it quiet, but he knew what was coming. Now, there's nobody more articulate than Robin Williams in his prime. He could speak clearly and rapidly with a quick wit. And so these sports injuries can cause this kind of stuff down the road. So when we started to get CTE on the radar, really hit the forefront with that 2015 movie called Concussion by Will Smith when he wasn't acting like an idiot. So, but Concussion was the true account of the doctor who worked for the city of Pittsburgh, in the coroner's office. That's like a government job, right? He wasn't Ben Carson, in other words, neurosurgeon. This coroner does an autopsy on this homeless, huge man and finds the plaque and the damage of chronic traumatic encephalopathy that he has never seen before with an old person or a homeless person or whatever. And this man was not that old, but he looked old. He was in his 50s. And it was Mike Webster of the Pittsburgh Steelers, 4-time champion. And that's when you started to realize what football can do. That's when you realized that it wasn't the knockout punch. Webster probably never was knocked out in football, but he was the center. So every time he snapped the ball, the quarterback, somebody hit him in the head. Somebody hit him in the head. It was the nose guard or linebacker. Somebody was trying to block him, but he was defenseless on the snap because his hands were on the ball and he was unprotected except for the helmet. And that was revolutionary because the extensive damage that they found clinically, you can't argue with the slides. I mean, they did slides and they shared them. You wouldn't believe this guy. And he was homeless because of the damage to his brain. He couldn't hold a job and he was depressed. He couldn't be married and lived out of his truck. And you self-medicate to stop the voices because you're anxious and you're depressed. And how can I be the star in front of 70,000 people and on the banquet circuit and people love you and they give you free meals and free drinks? Now I don't know my name. So it's a great movie. And this guy, he took on an organization that owned a day of the week. That's the greatest line. But fighting the National Football League, in days gone by, it was a more popular game. When a sports league doesn't understand they're in the entertainment business and they think they're in the just cause and anti-whatever business, you start to lose your hardworking fans because the ticket money means something. And so, you know, your number one revenue in a pro sport, including the National Football League, is your TV deals. So your TV deals make more money for the players than ticket sales, but ticket sales is a close second. And third is the sales in the collective bargaining agreement of the merchandise, the jerseys and the pennants and the t-shirts and that. So if you start messing with your fan base, you lose the fans on TV. So the TV revenues go down, you lose ticket sales, and then you lose your merchandise sales. You lose everything. And the National Football League found that out real quick.
Yeah.
When they started, people don't understand that when you're a player, you work for an owner, and it ain't slavery. Those people make more money in a game check. Your salary is 17 different weeks of a game check. So they talk about slavery. They don't remember slavery because they make more money in a Sunday than I made my whole life. I think Lamar Jackson makes 30 mil next year. I never made in my life more than $1 million, whatever. I don't want to hear about the slavery. So, and it's a business. It's the entertainment business. You've got to keep these players safe. And for years, the NFL didn't care. You were the circus performer that got hurt on the trapeze. They didn't care.
But they knew that there was a problem, but they wanted to keep that as quiet as possible, like the, you know, cigarette companies wanted to deny that cigarettes cause cancer.
Right. Yeah. The cigarette companies worked hand in glove with the American Cancer Society in the 50s.
Yeah. So you highlighted, you know, obviously a knockout punch, or if you lose consciousness, that's obviously a problem. But if you don't lose consciousness, it doesn't mean that there's not a problem, that those microtraumas are extremely hard on the brain. And it's not just a short-term issue. It's what we see 20, 30 years down the road. Just because the concussion clears up doesn't mean that your brain is okay going forward. So
exactly.
Dementia is a problem. Alzheimer's is a problem. Parkinson's is a problem. Suicides are a problem. Years, decades later. Depression,
anxiety. So if you're not sick yet, you still feel bad. Always treat the patient, not the disease.
Yeah.
You know, you can test people for stuff, and that includes this latest COVID stuff. We're testing healthy people for the first time in history. That makes no sense. But you want people to be examined, not computer examined when they're sick, including concussion. You want them tested. And like I said, there's some tests that doctors can do and athletic trainers can do. We can spot a rat quick.
You mentioned earlier today that for second impact syndrome, 1 + 1 equals 35. It's like, why?
It's exponential.
Why is that such a problem? Like,
we don't know.
You tried to keep people off the field and off the mat and off the court when they had their first concussion so that they wouldn't get that second one.
Right.
Because why?
Because the likelihood of another injury, it just grew. Yeah, I saw the second concussion a year later with that 11th grader, and all he did was, he wasn't touched. He just hit his head on the grass. It was grass, but it was the summer. He had his helmet on, but he went full-blown sick.
Yeah.
And then I heard the dreaded, well, I'm a nurse and we're going to treat it my way. And I went, I don't come to your office or hospital. And I knew that it was a jackpot. And they don't understand depression. Depression is rage without enthusiasm. I heard that a long time ago. Depression's not anger. Depression is deep-seated rage that has no way of escaping unless there's help.
Yeah.
And that turns into self-harm and suicide.
And that can be a result of a head injury.
Many times.
Yes.
Many times.
Yeah.
You just watch these kids. Time's on your side. The real jackpot I had when I was in the pros as a minor league athletic trainer with no doctors around, and I'm in Savannah on a steamy, hot Georgia night, and one of my Dominicans who doesn't speak English gets hit in the head with a thrown baseball at infield practice. He gets hit right in the temple. And he goes down, and I needed my catcher who spoke Spanish to ask Julio how he was doing. I was scared to death. He turned out okay, but you just don't know. I don't understand why the young lady with the seizures was treated, releasing shock trauma, and cleared up for the rest of the time. But somebody that you didn't think was sick gets a full-blown episode that lasts months. That's what the syndrome part does. It's so spooky. It's just spooky.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I don't know, but from my understanding of genetics, I mean, we all have a different predisposition for inflammation. We all have a different predisposition for the ability to detoxify. So, I mean, right. Maybe they're not cleaning out the brain well when they're sleeping, because maybe they're not getting into deep sleep when the brain needs to do its cleansing. Maybe their inflammation markers are up, and so they're in.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah,
absolutely. And it used to be, and this is good for the video, it used to be the concussion went home and you woke them up every hour and shone the light in their eyes. You don't do that anymore. My dad died in '98, but he taught me that 20-some years ago, that what they need is sleep.
Sleep.
And the reason you woke them up is to see if they had a subdural or epidermal hematoma, which is a bleeding on the brain, which are uncommon in sports. It still happens. But you woke them up to see if they didn't wake up. So
right.
You created more anxiety and they needed to sleep. So what you realized over time is you really want to check on them by just walking into the room quietly and listen to them breathe. And if they are soundly sleeping, even snoring, let them sleep.
Yeah.
If you hear them gasping for air or they're not breathing, then there's something going on, because intracranial hemorrhage, when you bleed on the brain, there's no place for the blood to go. So the pressure builds. The body's amazing, as you know. So it tries to save itself. So blood pressure increases because there's nowhere for the blood to go, but your pulse drops. So your blood is pumping less often as your body tries to heal itself. And signs of an expanding intracranial hemorrhage, subdural epidermal hematoma, is these symptoms get worse. The person was okay after they got up, they walked off the field. They can throw up once, but the vomiting, the headache is worse. Watch for that kind of stuff. I watch for players to go in the wrong huddle. Football's a nightmare to supervise because you have 11 different battles on each side. You got 11 people on each side. And so you watch the ball, but you watch away from the ball. And then you watch everybody go, up, get up, get up, get up, get up. And the thing I really worried about was the neck injury. I didn't want anybody paralyzed. So we called those injuries of the player down on the field head and neck injuries. Mm-hmm. In 1976, they were tired of these kids with cervical fractures and paralysis, and they outlawed head first tackling and blocking in football. And that cuts your neck injuries way down. Now, players still did it. It's called spearing, by tackling or whatever head first. And they've really started to call that more often, using your head first and that. But you saw your neck injuries drop in 76, but the concussions stayed.
Right. Yeah. No, we touched on this already, Paul, but if you can maybe elaborate a little bit. So what are the long-term or downstream risks associated with head injury, even if it seems to be an isolated event from which the person recovers?
Well, you have a higher chance of the hard drive being damaged, and that's impairment of function. You have people that really lose memory. Some lose it from the day before, but then some people have like mild stroke symptoms. They can't reason over time. They can't go back to school. initially and for a long time. And some people, it's never. So you treat this thing over time. You do cognitive testing. A lot of people might check into a facility for dementia, that stuff, but it's too late by then. You really worry about brain damage. That's what you worry about. Besides the psychological depressions and substance abuse to try to medicate yourself to feel normal again, you should treat these things early and often, and rest is your friend. Yeah. And I've never met a high school kid that really had to play to get a scholarship. People say, well, they go to showcases in baseball, and they have travel teams, and parents spend a lot of money. If you're any good, they'll find you in a cornfield. These colleges, they'll find you. You know what I mean? People are paying thousands of dollars for club soccer and lacrosse now. It's insane, but you can really hold people out.
Yeah, I'm gonna share something from this book that I'm pulling out. So this is the End of Alzheimer's program, and this is kind of my Bible that I'm constantly referring to. And Dr. Dale Bredesen did decades of research in the lab, kind of discovering the mechanisms that contributed to Alzheimer's, trying to come up with a drug. And after decades, realizing this is not going to work. There is no magic pill that is going to make this better. We have to do, 36 different interventions, and one thing is not going to work. And he kind of started putting Alzheimer's in different categories. And one of them is traumatic injury. Most people have influences in more than one area. They might have an inflammatory or they call that hot Alzheimer's. That's the type 1, or cold Alzheimer's, which is low levels of nutrients and hormones, or sweet Alzheimer's, where there's high blood sugar. But there is a dazed or traumatic Alzheimer's, which comes from head trauma.
Yeah.
And that head trauma could have come when you were 15 or 20, and now you are showing signs of Alzheimer's when you're 50 or 60. So are there things that we can do to prevent concussion and head injury from all different areas? Like helmets obviously are one of them, but beyond helmets, what can we do to protect our brain?
We're running out of time, so I'll really start to fly through it.
It's okay. There's no time limit.
Okay. So in sports, we can always practice proper technique, whether it's tackling or blocking in football. So look at your sport and do prevention as far as technique. Many sports require mouth guards, and they should be worn all the way to the back teeth, so it prevents the jarring of the impact. And you see a lot of the kids cut the mouth guard so it just covers the front teeth, and that's foolishness, because the fully fitted mouth guard all the way to the back teeth is a real game changer. Rule changes have helped with the heading in soccer. There's rules all over the pros and colleges and high school limiting your contact periods with football practice. I was raised with the more tackling practice, the better tackler you were. And in the 70s and 80s, it became a more cerebral game. And many smart coaches, like Joe Gibbs with the Redskins, very successful coach, you limit your contact periods because the body can only take too much. And so sports-wise, those are my big things. If we talk about nutrition, it seems like most pathologies today are exacerbated by inflammation, and inflammation in the diet is sugar and white flour. They're the two enemies. And so when I see these people, whether it's Facebook or real life or in my massage office, and people talk about their autoimmunes, which have exploded, especially the farther north you move, geography-wise, you see more autoimmunes because it's a vitamin D deficiency, to put it simply. And so you don't see lupus at the equator. And you don't see the MS in Florida unless they went down there to live once they really got it. You don't see the MS in the South that you see in Michigan. And that's just the way it is. You see more wheelchairs from MS the farther north you move. And if you look in the United States, 4 out of 5 or 80% are vitamin D deficiency because we're not outside. Whatever we're getting in the diet cannot be synthesized. And so we're running deficiency diseases now, and we're running diseases now that are killing us of excess, not as opposed, in addition to nutrient deficiency, it's excess in our diets, calories and sugar and empty calories and white flour. Sugar's poison. And a lot of our genetically modified foods are poison and getting worse. So can I keep going with the supplement?
Keep going, yeah, because I want you to touch on EPA and DHA.
Okay, so supplement-wise, B12 is a great brain booster because it's great for circulation in the nervous system. And I'm saying no to B12 shots. B12 shots are moneymakers, and they're given by prescription by the doctor. They're getting a cut. And I'll be darned, that's like getting oxygen once a month. That's foolishness. I believe in a high pharmaceutical grade supplement, and they're tough to find, and they're impossible to find in stores because supplements in stores are heat processed. Heat kills nutrients. Go ahead and boil your broccoli and see how many nutrients are left except in the water that you boiled broccoli. So heat kills nutrients. Cold processing of supplements are everything. And it's very hard to do. That's the only supplements I take are cold processed, made with organic materials. And organic tells you what's not in something, but organic never tells you what's in it. So you have to look at the sources of your nutrients for all sorts of other things. I'm in a line of supplements where we test for toxic metals, and besides being organic, that's one thing. But we can find 1 drop of water of impurity in 20 Olympic swimming pools. That's how sensitive our raw materials are coming in. So you have to, the first thing you have to test for when you're making supplements is lead. Do you know why there's lead in the soil around the world? We used to use leaded gasoline. You aren't old enough for leaded gasoline versus unleaded, but we put leaded gasoline in our gas tanks, airplanes, tractors, locomotives. I mean, we used, and so that was spewed out in our soil. So you've got lead in the soil everywhere. So you've got to watch your trace minerals. And so you've got to take pharmaceutical grade supplements like I do that are cold processed. But anyway, B12 is a great supplement. And I say to take a complex B supplement, a B complex, because B12 is great, but B1 is great for the brain. That's thiamine. B2 is riboflavin. B3 is niacin. I've seen reports, and you can't patent a nutrient. The drug companies do not bother to patent a vitamin C because there's no money in it. They add a compound to it to make a drug. And I'll tell you that story in a second because it's a great story. So when I look at the brain, I look at B12, I look at B1 thiamine, I look at B2 riboflavin, I look at B3 niacin. Niacin's better for depression than Prozac. I mean, niacin is a great nutrient. B6 is famous, but that's called pyridoxine, but I just say B6. And your omegas are great for the brain. And the 2 omega-3s that you can't get from the diet are DHA and EPA. But they should be cold processed fish. You know, we use what I take is like cold. There's sardines that live off the shelf of Africa, and there's cold processed in Sweden or whatever we do. And so those are your supplements. Your B complex, especially 12, and then your EPA and DHA of your omega-3s are crucial. And if you talk about prescriptions, the most prescribed and most profitable drug in history was a statin to lower cholesterol, and was put out by Pfizer. Has anybody in the audience ever heard of Pfizer? But they came out in 2003 with Lipitor. And Lipitor made them millions a year and eventually billions a year. And that lowered your cholesterol. And cholesterol is crucial for brain. Crucial. And you eliminate cholesterol artificially in hopes of lowering heart disease. If it works so well, why is heart disease still our #1 killer at 611,000 people a year in the United States? Why? People made a big deal over COVID, but cancer killed more people than COVID, even from the beginning. Heart disease kills more people than all cancers, but cancer's catching it. Cancer's in the 590s. Even with all the billions in the American Cancer Society, even with all your cancer centers, even with all your chemotherapies and your radiation, we're still losing, man. So Lipitor, and then they came out with Crestor to lower your cholesterol. I tell you, and then they lowered your scores for your doctor to be able to prescribe it. Well, you're borderline now. Well, I wasn't. Well, they lowered the scores. I want to put you on a statin. Well, you got to lower the cholesterol. No, you don't. No, you don't. You don't lower cholesterol, you lower inflammation. Sure. Why, after chemotherapy, do they bring you Jell-O? That's sugar. Why do people do crazy? They still do it. And you can shut me up and you can censor me, but I'm still going to tell you what I think is to be the truth, which became really out of vogue in March of 2020 with this COVID stuff. I mean, there were some doctors treating COVID with really, really cheap off-label brands that have been around 50 years that cost pennies. They were censored, man. Yeah. Oh, man. I saw that and I went, this can't be true, but it was and still is. But anyway, my final story is about a great supplement, a group of supplements that help circulation in the brain. And it came into being in 1998. This physiologist and doctor won the Nobel Prize for physiology and medicine in 1998. And he discovered that an essential amino acid that we should have every day, we should have this arginine, call it L-arginine. We should have this in, our bodies every day through green leafy vegetables or wherever you get L-arginine. They found that this created nitric oxide in the body that helped the blood vessels constrict and dilate. This amino acid, this natural amino acid, was discovered, won the Nobel Prize, and so all these supplement companies started with arginine or L-arginine products as a supplement. Well, Pfizer goes quickly. Pfizer goes, we got to make a drug out of this, but you can't make a drug out of a nutrient. You can't patent it. So their guys went to the labs and they put a compound with it. When you put a compound with it, you can create a drug. And in less than a year, this was FDA approved for heart disease, because when you increase circulation, you lower blood pressure. And it was FDA approved for heart disease. It was our #1 killer in 1998. And man, Pfizer did it. What was that drug called? Viagra. And the Viagra had this side effect of increased circulation down there. You know what I mean? And so it was used off-label for erectile dysfunction. And then it helped females as well for sexual dysfunction.
Right. But if you eat your greens, you're gonna have a better effect.
You want better
help your whole body.
Viagra, because if you have an erection lasting longer than 4 hours, you got to get an injection.
Yeah.
Oops. But anyway, I take it. You can tell. I take an L-arginine supplement, and it's good for you, and it increases circulation. And you can tell I take a lot of supplements. And in conclusion, whether it's concussion or not, you have to supplement the diet today. I mean, there was a 1960 study that said broccoli has 18% of the iron that it used to have, you know, before that, when we were over farming and big agro took over small farms, and sometimes you're paid not to grow anything, and the little farmers struggling, and my parents, and then before that, they didn't eat organic. They just ate fresh food, you know, and now it comes in a box. And oh, lo and behold, we're sicker and sicker, even with the statins and the medication. So,
yeah. Well,
we could talk forever, but I wanted to get all those points in.
Yeah, and it's appropriate to finish up with the nutrition. It's also National Nutrition Month, and it is. And so you talked about all the things that we need to reduce inflammation, getting rid of sugar and white flour, and then all of the nutrients that we need to nourish the body, support the body, the vitamin D, the B complex, the EPA, DHA, all good for the brain and the rest of the body in general. So I want to at least touch on 2 more things that can help with concussion for anybody who have a dear friend now who's recovering from a concussion from snowboarding, you know, had a headache for a month from a fall on the hill, though it changed based on her altitude. When she was high on the mountain, she felt fine. And when she came down to town, she got a headache again. Were you going to say something about that?
Oh yeah, but the altitude can be dangerous. Yeah. When we had that skier in France, the actress gets the concussion on the ski slope, and she died on the flight on the way home from an intracranial bleed because at altitude she bled more.
Oh, that's interesting. I didn't know that.
Yeah. I remember that one of the athletic trainers told me he had a real old team. I think it was the Orioles when they were old. He said, we fly from West Coast to East Coast. We swell up on the plane.
Yeah.
So, yeah, you get dehydrated at altitude, but yeah, everything changes with your body and altitude and not. Yeah.
But also ways that you can continue to heal a head injury, even if it was decades old, and hyperbaric oxygen therapy is amazing in that area. When I touched on persistent vegetative state, my college boyfriend was in a car accident, not a scratch on his head, but the brain hits against the skull, and he was in shock trauma with a shunt sticking out of his head, releasing the pressure.
You had a bleeder. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And what transitioned him from being completely non-functional to at least being able to communicate was hyperbaric oxygen.
That's pretty recent. You got some pro people that can afford to have one put in their house.
Yeah, they ended up buying one for his house because
they
moved. Yeah. The family moved to Florida because at that point there was one center in California and one center in Florida, and they were going to do the best that they could do for their son. They moved to Florida and had him in hyperbaric oxygen daily, and he started to make improvements. So they bought one and brought him back to Maryland. And
there's a rule in medicine: never be the first or the last person to do anything in medicine, but because it can cause trouble, or like a new vaccine could hurt people, or things like that. But so a lot of people with concussions were afraid to try certain things because it's so benign and creepy. It's insidious. The definition of insidious is a real danger that it's not really present to the naked eye until it's too late. And so people went to hyperbaric chambers. There's one at Maryland. You've got them in some trauma centers, and usually near the beach, because you need it from the diving.
Right.
When you get the sickness, from the diving and coming up too quickly to the surface, or whatever, the bends. You see the hyperbaric chambers around all that. Yeah, right. It's a great idea.
Yeah. So I wanted to let you know that Sean Schmidt says he loves Paul. He's the best.
Thank you.
And Dan Gorley is watching. And
oh, great.
And hi, Mary. Mary's watching too. So we've got some people out there, some Paul fans. So if people want to find you, Paul, you are still working as a massage therapist, correct?
Yes, I have a small private practice on Main Street in Westminster, and it's very quiet. And I might see people for sports injuries, but a lot of people come to me, they just don't feel well. And we talk about things, and then I work on people, and it's more holistic. I've gotten away from, how's the knee? Well, I have a bad knee because it robbed a gas station last night. I don't want to cut people up anymore. I have when you see me, it's just me, and it's just you and me, you and I, and we talk, and sometimes we just talk, but it's my own, and I get to do things, and so that's on Main Street. I'm on Facebook, I'm on Twitter, and my cell phone is 410-365-3793. Facebook Messenger is a great way to get me. My website's westminstermdmassage.com. But I'd rather talk to you. And it's listed. My phone number's listed.
I don't have a phone book. I don't even know how to find people. How do you do that?
Google. It's Google.
Okay.
Google me. You'll get my cell phone, and my office phone's great to leave a message.
Okay, cool.
So thank you.
Oh, thank you so much for your time and your amazing energy and the information that you shared. So hopefully it helps somebody out there. I'm sure it at least brings awareness to brain injury and things that we can do to reduce risk. And we appreciate you and your time. Thank you.
Thanks for having me. It was great. Thank you.
Good night, everybody. Happy Wellness Wednesday.
Good night.